Hi, welcome to my report. Let's get straight into it with my personal timeline. The basics. Week one, I knew very little of deployment. I had like the basics since I had deployed personal applications on a self-hosted server, but my knowledge was mostly around configuring a system and networking with the firewall and such. Week two, this is about where we started exploring Docker. I was introduced to Docker in a more in depth sense than I had ever before. I had done minor work with Docker last semester to simulate a public and private network, um, but I really wasn't very familiar. I found that understanding the Docker file structure was hard at this point, and I didn't really like the technology. I'd also get particularly annoyed at waiting for builds and not having a real understanding of what was going on, so it led to a lot of trial and error without really making any progress between attempts. Then, week three, end of week two, that's when we went into DevOps. It was my first introduction to the concept of DevOps. I had seen it before on job postings, but I had never looked into it. And so I thought it was very interesting that developers, like the idea that developers should have more of a hand in deployment, um, since deployment, system administration, and security are things that interest me, and I thought I'd like to explore. That sounded like something great for me to look into. However, I do want to keep coding, so that's something that is perfect essentially with the idea of DevOps, where developers are more into that kind of business. Week four is when we were introduced to architectures. When I say architecture, I'm talking microservices and monolithic architectures. So I learned about microservices compared to monoliths. I didn't really know the benefits of splitting a monolithic application into microservices. So I think that if I was designing an application, it'd be important for me to consider how in the future I might want to split it into microservices so it can stay scalable. For week five, the main point for me was container security. I learned more about container security, which made me realize just how unsecure Docker can be if bad actors are given access to Docker on a system. I was very shocked when I found out that someone with Docker access could essentially just access the whole system. Week six is when we dove more into the topic of monitoring. Um, I learned about monitoring and how and its importance to provide a high quality service. I knew it was important to detect outages and respond accordingly. I didn't, however, realize how important it was, and for example, to collect telemetry data and other information to further improve the app and respond to outages. I also got to, for week seven, I got to familiarize myself a little bit more with Docker through a hands on assignment. I struggled a lot with containerizing the application at first, but I ended up finding success and I really enjoyed the process. So I found that I learned a lot. Even following this a little bit later, I even ended up containerizing another application fully of my own choice, and I found the process pretty painless since I had already gone the understanding from doing this hands-on activity. I also got to start using the AWS dashboard for the first time, which was also interesting, but not something I'd particularly be interested in doing a lot more in the future. Week 8 is where we got a lot more into AWS. I got practice with the AWS platform. I, however, didn't find it too interesting, although I'm still familiar with it and it could be a useful skill. I did find that we discussed Kubernetes, which I thought was very interesting. Um, I had to research for a little, very short presentation that I had, and I found that it was an interesting progression of what we learned with Docker. I also learned more about attack personas, which was interesting to see the amount of different attackers that might target an organization, from script kiddies to organized crime rings. So let's move on to some little things right here that I had prepared. So here's, for example, from my notes, the finding that essentially the, like commands can be run as root, even though no sudo is used, and a user could do this without even having sudo permissions. And so here's like a little bit of my reflection on this kind of thing. Also, here's what I wrote down about essentially layers of an organization, essentially like the organization as in like more the people as a whole, application dependencies, the deployment pipeline, and the execution environment. And so this is when we were discussing and looking into security, essentially. So what comes down to container security, security within the organization, and other things of the sort. So for the technical report, there are a few questions that I thought would highlight a little bit of what I learned. So what new concrete skills and knowledge would I be bringing back to the team? So I now have pretty extensive knowledge of Docker. I would be able to containerize most application based on like a simple README, even if I'm not very familiar with the application itself. I'm also pretty familiar with container security now, having learned best practices, how to mitigate security breaches within containers. I also know how to set up container scanning, which can be something that's very useful. I'm also familiar with container optimization, how to reduce the size of an image, in part to reduce attack surfaces, but also just to save up on disk space and have faster builds, which can also save CI minutes or just general developer time. I also learned more about architectures like microservices and monolithic architectures, and how each has its own niche and isn't necessarily the end all be all. Some scenarios require microservices, while others it's just complicating the whole solution, which is something I'd be very happy to talk with the team about during a meeting. Another question: do I have opinions on deployment options, tools, or best practices? What I liked about containers is that they're an effective platform agnostic and lightweight solution, meaning that by using containers, we try to limit how much we are depending on a specific cloud service, which can be very nice. For example, if early on a certain cloud service fits our need very nicely, and then when we try to scale, it doesn't fit our needs anymore, prices go up, then it can be very interesting to always have the flexibility of moving on without too much hassle. The lightweight nature is great for containers. It allows them to run on lighter system without having to emulate a whole operating system. And essentially, they're just a very effective, with a decent ease of use solution. So I would personally recommend them in certain scenarios. How could I help the team learn? So the way I could help the team, like what I could help you learn essentially. I'm familiar with CI pipelines, how to write them, how they can be useful. So that's something I can bring up to the team and help set up. I'm also familiar with DevOps, which ties in with the pipeline and my future CI/CD point. So how we can essentially bring developers a little bit closer to the production application, to deployment, and how that can help by essentially shortening the feedback loop and making sure developers are in touch with the issues that are happening. CI/CD kind of ties into DevOps and the pipeline, so it's ensuring essentially that we have continuous integration, which is essentially running automated tests, making sure that everything is working properly, and in a way that we're able to merge to main or merge to a shared branch more often, and continuous delivery or deployment is being able to ship a product out to customers as often as possible so we can get feedback and quickly resolve issues. So, my last point, how the team would benefit from my training. I'm familiar with many resources now, namely the GitLab CI documentation, which can be hard to navigate at times, so I can be a great resource for that, and the Docker file reference, as well as other Docker documentation, such as Compose. I'd be happy to help the team with any issues regarding those topics and other topics. I also have many notes that I've compiled through the course that I'd be happy to share if anyone wants them. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to discuss this further during a meeting, and I hope you have a great day.